Goonhammer has partnered with Legalized Mischief to present you with Colin Ward's long-form painting videos. Like and subscribe, and follow Legalized Mischief and Goonhammer for more hobby tutorials.
Hey everyone, it's Colin with Legalized Mischief Productions. Thank you for joining me and welcome. Today we're going to be talking about batch painting, Death Korps of Krieg, infantry, and batch painting is something that I talk about a lot, but I really haven't covered in tutorials very much because the way that I film tutorials, where I show you kind of everything that I do in general, it just doesn't lend itself to batch painting because batch painting can get tedious and it's a lot of repetition. So the efficiency comes from the repetition, but it's not good television. So what I'm going to be doing is painting up some of these Death Korps of Krieg, and we're going to go through the process. I'm not going to show you every brush stroke. I'm going to do the airbrushing initially, and then I'll go through when I do the base coats on the leather. I'll base coat, one or two guys, and then come back. The base coats will be done, right? Do the wash on a couple guys, come back, wash will be done. So like that. It'll take a little bit while. It'll take a lot longer to film videos because I'll have to get a lot of those clips together, but whatever. So what I have here is a Death Korps of Krieg guardsman who has gone through the process already. I'm painting these for an army commission. And I have over 100 infantry to paint for this commission. So this is one of those things that I really enjoy about commission painting, where I would not collect a Death Korps of Krieg army personally, but I get to paint one, which would be really cool. So it's a pretty good sized army. So I'll be doing this tutorial on the infantry, and I'm also going to do a tutorial on how I paint the tanks. So the key here is to get an efficient scheme for the infantry, which you can see are pretty detailed. They're very small, and they're pretty detailed. I didn't go crazy on the detail because, again, it's a commission. You paint to a certain standard. But I would be very, very happy to put this on the table for myself, for my own army. I think it looks great. It's that classic kind of blue-gray greatcoat. With the dark steel metallics, cloth mask, and then the yellowish brown leather elements that I think look really good. So that's the scheme that I'm going to be painting. The basing's not done yet, but I will cover the basing in this tutorial series. So that will get covered. And this is a good standard. I'm really, really happy with this. And the key to doing an army commission like that is to get an efficient way to paint this much infantry to that standard. And that's something that I think I'm really good at. So first things first, when I have this group of models that are assembled and primed, right? It's about 70 infantry. The first time, while I was just working out the scheme, I did a batch of, 12 or 15 artillery crew, something like that. But I did all the artillery crew at once because they all kind of have shared elements on the models. So it just makes life easier and more efficient. But I'm not painting a bunch of different things. I'm concentrating just on the artillery guys because they have shared elements. This group is 15 models. They're already glued on their base. They're already primed black. These are all special weapon guys. So plasma guns, flamers, grenade launchers. These are all weapons that will have little kind of what I'll be using brass. Will have little brass elements to them. So it's just kind of another step in painting, but it's another step that pretty much all of them share. So with that in mind, I grouped them together. 15 is not a bad number for batch painting for me. And one of the keys about batch painting is that you will find your pain threshold for how big a batch you can paint at once of which models, right? So some models like Primaris Intercessors, I like to do at least 10 at a time, if not 20. Um, for things like Death Company that have a lot of detail on them, like 10 is pretty much is the max I want to go. Um, with little things like this where there's really only 5 or 6 elements, yes, they all require, base coat, wash, highlight, all that, but 15 is a reasonable size. I rarely go above 15 or 20 at a time. So, because it just gets too repetitive. If the batch is big enough that when I sit down, all I can do in one night is like base coat something, and I don't even finish the whole batch of base coating. So the next time I sit down to paint, I'm just base coating the same thing that I was the day before. That doesn't feel like progress, and that makes it more difficult. So that's a sign to me that I need to paint a smaller batch. Anyway, when we're looking at the Death Korps models, the largest element on them obviously is the great coat, and that's where we want the blends from the shadow to light. We see these really nice kind of dark shadows underneath that really dark uh, blue gray, dark sea blue from Vallejo monocolor, lightening out on the lower part of the coat and the top of the arms and everything. So that's where we want to use the airbrush, and that will get the main elements on our models painted. And then we'll go back and do everything else with the brush. The leather, face masks, steel helmets, everything except like the OSL on this plasma gun will be done with a brush. So first things first, our trusty airbrush. I use a Patriot Extreme 105 with a superfine detail kit. That is my preferred loadout. And oh, come on. I should have cleaned this better. But it's too late now. So it'll be fine. There we go. There we go. Okay. Never a good sign. Okay, anyway. A little bit of water. And then Vallejo Dark Sea Blue. One of my favorite colors. Really, really desaturated, kind of bluish, greenish, grayish color. I have more of this. That's always a fun part too, when you figure out, like I figured out how I wanted to paint this army and then ordered like doubles and triples of everything. Because this is a large, like I said, this is a large commission. It's 100 and, I don't know, 110, 120 infantry, something like that. And then, I don't know, 5 or 6 artillery pieces, some heavy weapon teams, 10 of the Death Riders cavalry. Baneblade variant, super heavy, a Gorgon, a Praetor armored assault launcher, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I don't know, 8 or 9 tanks, 8 or 9 like Lehman Russ Chimera sized tanks. So not a small commission, but one that I'm super excited about. So it's a bunch of models that I haven't painted before, and certainly in the case of the Death Korps themselves, models that I would not paint for myself. So just not really my jam. So dark sea blue, and I'm going to come in, and this is just an overall base coat. I'm not going to worry about getting coverage on any other part of the model. You can see I start from underneath. I don't want to leave those shadows black, even though this is going to dry really dark. So you can see that. You see how dark that's drying. Perfect. And then I'm just going to blast through. Yeah, I definitely should have cleaned this before filming, but we'll be okay. Again, just making sure I get a nice even base coat on everything. Doesn't have to be thick. And of course, the thing that I love about batch painting is the first guy's already dry. Right, I'm a little more than halfway through the batch, and the first model is already dry. So by the time I get to the last model, enough models will be dry for me to start on the next one, and I'm not sitting around waiting for anything. I really don't enjoy sitting around waiting for paint to dry. It's pretty much my least favorite thing, because that's time I could spend doing other things, painting other things on the model, but I have to wait. So batch painting kind of just takes that out of the equation. The bubbling's gonna drive me crazy. There we go. And this is going to be a neat trick. I'm looking forward to showing you this, actually. Because I'm looking at my paint pot here. This is always a neat trick. So I have a pretty good amount of paint left in there. And now the next color in this recipe is a mix of blue-gray pale, which is this color from Vallejo Model Color, which you see is a very light blue, very pale blue-gray. Imagine that. So blue-gray pale, not to be confused with pale gray blue, which is a different color, which is this color. So blue-gray pale and pale gray blue, two different colors for Vallejo, which on the one hand is asinine, but on the other hand is really funny. So, oh gosh. So this is pale gray blue. This is blue-gray pale. You can see how much darker the blue-gray is. So we're going with blue-gray pale because I don't want to step up that much. And then we're mixing which, you know, people say you shouldn't do, but it hasn't really negatively affected my life. Blue Gray Pale, and the Deep Sea Blue. Or the Dark Sea Blue, excuse me. And that is my first highlight. Pretty efficient. So I'm just clearing the gunk off the needle, and now I need to move these way far away up the painting bench so that they don't get hit with a highlight before their time. And you see what a nice progression that is off of that pale, or that dark sea blue, right? You see it's not crazy light. As that dries, right, that's not a huge transition. It's just a nice soft blue, gray blue color. So, like we do in, you know, kind of the grayscale tutorials, humanoid tutorials, top of the arms, and then the kind of lower part of the cloak here. Same thing on the back. Top of the shoulders, leave the midriff area kind of more in shadow. And we're off. First one of those. Again, top of the arms. I don't really want to get the center of the chest, especially because it's behind the gun there. Knee area, lower part of the cloak here, and the upper part of the back. Well, I guess I can move that to where you could see what I was painting. Whoa, hey. And then as that dries, it darkens down, right? But you see we have that really nice, already looking good. Already looking good. Flamer Bro. Whoop. Artillery Bro, top of the arm. Top of the shoulder. Make sure you get that front cuff. Melta Bro. Top of the arms. Concentrate around the knees, knee area. Lower part of the cloak. And the shoulders. Right? And just go through and do that on every guy. Top of the arms, knee area, bottom of the cloak, shoulders. Top of the arm, knee area, bottom of the cloak, shoulders. Boom. Already halfway done. Top of the arm, knee area, bottom of the cloak, shoulders. And this guy's chest is a little more open, so I will hit the top of the chest there. Always trying to maintain that kind of visual to the head, right? Have the head be the focal point. So this guy does get a little on the chest because that's exposed, and that'll help keep the eyes on the head, keep the eye drawn to that area. But really, the light khaki kind of cloth gas mask being the only. See, again, this guy's held really low, so I'm going to hit the chest with. Highlight color as well. The light khaki cloth mask being the lightest element on the model and the only element of that color on the model, goes a long way to keeping the focus on the head and on the face. Otherwise, these models can get real busy real quick and just kind of muddled. It's another reason for the kind of limited palette on these guys. Is partly that, but also partly just they have that historical kind of World War I feel to them. And you don't, there's literally nothing fancy about these guys at all. They are the antithesis of fancy. So you want to be careful not to just overdress these guys. You want them to be extremely utilitarian, drab in color, nothing kind of punchy or exciting. Because that would be like the color scheme really going against the aesthetic of the model. So now I still have a ton of this highlight color in here that I don't really need. I need some of it to mix my next highlight color, but I don't need all of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to dump it out. I'm not going to spray any of the paint out. So there's still some paint there at the bottom. I'm going to drop a little bit, just a drop of water in there and a little bit more of this blue-gray pale and lighten that up one more step, and you can see that lighten up right there, right? So that is one step lighter. It's still a good consistency. And you can see here on the, then I got to clear the airbrush to get down to that highlight color in the cup. No big deal. And then you can see here that next level highlight. Once that dries out, ooh, that's a little watery, huh? That's all right. Once it dries out, you cannot see it because there is too much water in this paint. So a little bit more, a little bit more blue-gray pale, and no more water. There we go. Yeah, it is deep clean time for the old airbrush for sure. There we go. There we go. So you can see that now. Nice smooth transition. Well, you see it on the model anyway. And now we're going to be even more selective. So this is really for the arms and the very kind of bottom front of the cloak. Kind of bottom of the cloak there, bottom of the cloak there, and just a hit on the shoulder. And now we have that really nice transition. It's not that light in person. It's a little light. Yeah, it's a little light. Little bit light. So I'll just be very gentle with this. So this is just like a whisper. I do not want to lighten this up to the point where it looks like a light gray. I just want a little bit more. And then this will also get toned down as I work on the model. Certainly once I do kind of the oil wash and everything, it will be lessened and kind of brought back in line with, oops. But contrast on infantry is really important. The models are really small. So you don't want to, if you don't have enough contrast, they just kind of look really flat. They just have one, just kind of a single note, which is not obviously what we want. So You can see they're just kind of hitting the bottom of the cloaks, top of the back there. And it's interesting, as we do the yellow leather, like this will look more blue because it's sitting next to the yellow. It's really cool. These are pretty dark gray. I mean, these are pretty dark blue gray. I'm happy with these. But it'll be cool to say when we get to the oil wash step how that changes. The next step I think is probably the most tedious, and that's undercoating the yellow leather. There's just a lot to do, and of course you have to be careful. So there we have it. 15 guys airbrush base coats in 20 minutes, less than 20 minutes. And part of that is just experience, right? But part of that is, kind of rolling the dice on mixing the paint in the pot, which is not, it's not ideal. It's not necessarily what you want to be doing. But in a case like this where, I had the paint left over, like if I had mixed less dark sea blue at the beginning, I would have cleaned everything out and started fresh with a little dark sea blue and the blue gray pale. So it was kind of just the circumstance of that I had that paint left over, and instead of just pouring it out just to do it, ooh yeah, that'll affect. So I took the nozzle off, and there's a big old chunk of paint in there. Like that'll definitely affect your ability to get paint out of your airbrush, is a big old chunk of paint like that. So no wonder I was struggling, because I can go in my brush now and look at this. The big old booger in there. So that's why the paint was wrestling with me a little bit. But kind of clear out this little area here. But that's why we do a deep clean, is to get those. That's just from the paint pots. And that is the hazard of mixing in the pot, right, as you get those chunks. Whereas if I were mixing on a pallet, like Angel Heraldez mixes on a little piece of plastic, like a little pallet, he'll water down the paint to the consistency that he wants and on the pallet, and then pour that into his airbrush. Like, it's an extra step, but obviously it's obviously it works. I mean, Angel Heraldez does it, and it saves you from stuff like that. So probably worth it, but old dogs and new tricks and so on and so forth. So this should actually be good to go for at least the rest of this painting session, before giving it a deep clean. So, but now that I've done the airbrushing on the cloaks, like literally I am done using the airbrush on these guys until it comes time to gloss varnish them and oil wash them. So when we come back next time, will be a new video. I'll do the leather work and just start in on these models. Start doing the base coats and washes and stuff like that, and we'll work our way all the way through basing, and I'll show you kind of the whole process. But for 30 minutes worth of work, pretty darn good. We are well on our way and ready to knock out another 15 of these guys. And in one of the great things about batch painting, once I have these guys finished, I'm up around 30 infantry finished for the project, which I think is like 25% of the infantry for the whole project is done in 2 batches. So I don't think about 130 infantry, I think about 15. And then I paint those, and then I go find another 10. And I paint those, and I find another, because like the command elements, there are like 8 8 guys. So I'll paint those 8 guys together, spend a little more time on them. And then I have like 50 guys with las guns, so I'll break that up, right? So I'm not thinking about the 50. I'm thinking about doing 10, 15, 12, 15 guys at a time. So that's the secret. That's the tip. We're going to be doing part 2 of the Death Korps of Krieg batch painting tutorial series. And in part 1, we airbrushed the great coats, got a nice fade on those. And then the rest of the way, we are going to be using the brush. And the overall scheme, like I showed you in the last video, great coats and pants are this blue-gray. Those are going to get an edge highlight and an oil wash. The whole model is going to get oil washed, actually, but those will get an edge highlight. Shoes, straps, belt are all a yellowish leather. And then metallic and black on the guns with the brass kind of, this part of the flamer. Yellow leather on the shoes as well. Shoes, belt, straps, gloves, yellow leather. Dark steel metallic for the helmets, shoulder pads and stuff. Same as the gun and the hoses. And then the face mask is like a khaki and the eyes are like a bright green. So that's the overall scheme. And this is going to be a little different. It took me a minute to figure out how to get the yellowish leather look that I was going for. But I'm going to use inks kind of as a wash. I'm going to use like an ink wash to change the color of this to be the color that I want it to be. But the most important thing, you'll see what I mean. I'll use like a wood and brown mix ink, wood ink and brown ink mixed to get that kind of yellow color with a kind of final highlight, maybe. But I use a flesh color. I use basic flesh as the base coat for that leather. Even though it's lighter than I want the leather to be at the end. I hope this is what I wrote down. So I just got a little bit on the palette. And this is basic flesh from scale 75, but it's very similar to, oh my gosh, very similar to like beige red from Vallejo. Beige red's probably a little darker, but whatever. So I'd say that basic flesh, and just going to this is an old, kind of a messed up brush, but as long as I can just get base coats on the areas I want to get, I don't really care. If, it could be a little bit ratty. It doesn't have to be 100% perfect. Plenty of time for me to correct mistakes, plenty of time for mistakes to get covered by highlights and weathering. So not a big deal. Make sure to get the gloves because I always forget the gloves. And then this brush is a little too aggressively bad. I'm like really resisting dipping into a decent brush right now for whatever reason. Oops. Okay. So make sure you get the belt. And then these straps here, I'm using more of the side of the brush for the straps because they do stick out so much above the coat itself. Strappy, strap. And obviously the reason I'm doing the straps first is they are, they all have these little bags on their chests. I forget what they're called. There's a very specific name for that. Musette bag, maybe. I don't know if the musette bag is on the leg or I don't know. That's just a blind guess from I think Band of Brothers is where I got that name. That reminds me, I need to watch that again. Great series. If you haven't watched Band of Brothers, go watch it. No, I don't think that was supposed to be leather, but oh well. I think that's supposed to be the uniform color. Since it's yellow, since it's leather on the other side, we're going to paint it leather on this side. And then we just won't on the next guys. So kind of do a little, make sure to get an even coat because the ink is not going to do anything for me. The ink is not going to cover anything. It's just not. So I want to make sure to have an even coat, pretty even coat on all those elements. Check and make sure. And like there are pouches and stuff under here, but they're on the risk reward scale. Just a quick pass will be fine. There we go. And then I just pick up the next guy and, do the same thing. I mean, this is one approach, is kind of do one model, move on to the next model. That didn't take very long. That only took a couple minutes. So that's a pretty good way to do things for me on these models. But if you go back on the Patreon, there is a tutorial where I used clone troopers from Star Wars Legion to do a tutorial on another method of batch painting, which is like the 10-second method or the 30-second method. Basically what it is you don't have a model in your hands for longer than say 30 seconds. And so like I would paint the base coat on the shoes and then go to the next model, paint their shoes, go to the next model, paint their shoes, go to the next model, paint their shoes until I got all the shoes done. Then I would come back and I would paint the gloves, and then I would paint the gloves on one model. And that way you're always moving, you're always picking up models and putting them down. You're always kind of making progress and finishing those to-do list items, right? Like, okay, all the shoes are done, gloves are done, straps are done, belts are done, right? So that gives you a sense of accomplishment kind of as you go on. Whereas if I finish, like if I film, two of these guys, and then when it comes time for me to, like when my kids come home or whatever, I've only finished 11. Well, then when I sit down to paint next time, I still have 4 guys left to go. So I didn't really get that feeling of accomplishment because I left with when I still had work to do. So that's just a question of like, what's your motivation? If you are satisfied by saying, oh, I got 75% of the way there overall, then great. If you are more of a, I got 100% of this task done and 100% of this task done today, even if they add up to 75%. See what I'm saying? So that's just a question of how you're motivated yourself. And that's something that only you can really answer. So that's two guys. As you can see, pretty straightforward, pretty rough. But this is just a base coat. They're going to get a very strong ink wash, and then eventually they'll get oil washed as well. They're getting ink wash, they're getting strong tone, and they're getting an oil wash. So, these are getting washed down significantly. But for now, they look like kind of tan, untreated leather, even though it's just a flesh color. So, I'll be right back. I'm going to finish off the last kind of dozen or so guys, and then we'll return shortly to do the next step. And we're back. And now you see we've got 15 of these guys. We've got all the leather elements base coated with the basic flesh from scale 75. Again, you want similar results. It doesn't have to be the basic flesh specifically. It's a pretty general kind of flesh color. And now I'm going to bring in some inks from Scale Color. One is Inktense Wood, which is a very red brown. And then Inktense Brown, which is kind of this really muddy, almost greenish brown color. But it's going to tone down the red in the Inktense Wood a little bit. And this is going to be like the final, because I'm using inks and not washes. They're more saturated. They're more opaque. So they're going to be the really the final color of the leather. And I kind of want 2 parts of the Inktense Wood to 1 part of the Inktense Brown. And you can see that Inktense Wood, how kind of orangish reddish that is. And then we have the Inktense Brown. Put a few drops, a couple drops in there. And you can see it's still warm. Still a warm color, but that chilled it out a lot. So now we're just going to go back through, pick up the first guy. Move my chair a little closer. Pick up the first guy. Come through. Don't be shy with the ink. Again, we want full coverage, and we want to make sure that we get in all the recesses. And I'm doing this now instead of doing more base coats, because a lot of these leather elements are behind, things that we'll want to paint metallic or black or whatnot. So I'm not worried about overpainting onto the gun or anything. I do want to be careful around the greatcoat. That's why I've switched to not a trashy brush, a brush with the actual bristles and a point, so that we can get that nice. And this will have a little bit glossier. I want to make sure to get in between the feet. This will have a little bit glossier finish initially, but there you can see that's much more of a yellowish leather color. And this is the actual color of the leather that I wanted to get, versus some kind of flesh color or something. You can do kind of base coat, wash, highlight. Browns are really something that are trickier trickier than they would seem. You think brown is a very simple color, but it really, really isn't. And I was struggling to figure out, do I want a yellow kind of ochre or a brown or a tan, or how was I going to get that? So just kind of thinking a little outside the box can get you the results that you want, like these leather elements, by using just a base coat and then an ink to actually get the color that you want, instead of always looking just for the right base coat paint, acrylic wash, and then highlight paint. I'll come back. I think I come back and do a little bit. I might do a little bit of highlighting on this, but I think it depends. It might not actually get a traditional highlight. Because the kind of the flat areas and the upper areas are naturally going to be lighter than the recesses, obviously. So also the other reason why I'm doing this wash now instead of doing it later is because on the gloves there's a kind of a metal plate on the back of the hands, and I don't want to worry about that when I'm doing this ink when it comes time to base coat the metals. So we'll just do the ink first and then come in with the metals later. The idea is that any mistakes that I make at this stage, most of them can be covered up at a later stage. That's why I'm approaching this the way that I am, in the order that I am. So that, like if I make a mistake on this shoulder like that, not a big deal because I'm going to paint that shoulder metallic anyway. So it's just one less thing to worry about. And then I just go down the line and do this on all 15 guys. And then at this point, this is, off and on, with filming and everything. This is maybe a couple hours work. The base coating the leather took a minute because there's some fiddly straps and things like that, but maybe a couple of hours in. It certainly didn't take all day. I was also watching had a little movie on in the background, which tends to slow things down a little bit, but what can I say? I wanted to watch a movie today. So typically I'll just do an audiobook or podcasts or something like that while I'm painting, so it's not something visual, it's just something audio, so I don't have to look up. I can just keep painting, but it's good to mix it up sometimes. So get those straps. I don't know how. I mean, when I was researching color schemes for this army and just kind of looking at images of different schemes for this army, different models, different approaches, it really blows my mind. This is an army that you see very, very, very good painters tackle, and the level of detail that they're able to get on these models is incredible. These models are tiny. The details are tiny. And they're resin, they're old molds, so sometimes the casting is not great. So the fact that people, very, very good painters kind of cut their teeth, they kind of test their skill on these on these Death Korps with great results. So if you want to check out some really well painted models, I forgot to do the strap on this. I might actually, this strap doesn't actually meet. You can see here the way that the arms and everything come together. This strap is a couple millimeters short, so I'm probably actually just going to cut that off. I'll cut that bit off the shoulder and I'll cut that off the gun. And since I haven't painted either one of those colors yet, or either one of those elements yet, I can still do stuff like that. Ideally, I would do that before I prime the model, but this is one that I think probably came to me already assembled. And, you know, do quality control on 60 or 70 infantry models, but some things are bound to slip through the cracks. But you'll usually find them when you're painting, that's for sure. And that's not something that we can really fudge with paint either. That's something that has to be addressed kind of structurally. So no big deal. I'll actually just do that right now just to show you. Get my X-Acto here. I'm actually just going to bend that over and pull that off. And then on the shoulder, make sure to get a clean cut there. And then on the top of the gun as well. Just cut that off. Smooth that out. There we go. That's flush. The shoulder's flush. And then what I'll do is I'll just come back and I'll brush on some airbrush primer. That way I can reprime that surface, and then I'll go over it when I go to paint. When I go to paint the metallic elements and the black elements. So no big deal. I'm certainly, that's certainly a better solution, because really, I mean, you don't need that strap, right? It's not critical to the look of the model. It's not something that I'm going to miss when it's not there. I'm not going to look at the model and say, hey, where is the strap that goes from the top of the gun to his shoulder? Right? It's just not a thing. So in that case, rather than either trying to bend the arms or fix the strap or find something that I can use as part of a strap in order to glue it in there or something, and just all these time-consuming solutions, sometimes the best solution is just to abandon it altogether and cut it out and move on with your life, because I have, like I've said, I have over 100 of these guys to do. I'm not getting into sculpting or anything like that, and the model is no worse for wear. Right? If it was something that was critical to the model, that would be one thing, but it isn't. It's disposable. So that was five of these guys. Just a quick ink, and like the first guy's dry, and that looks pretty good. Nice definition, nice color. I like the color of the leather. I'm happy with that. So, and it took 10 or 12 minutes for 5 guys, with me talking and everything. So, I'm going to spend another 20 minutes finishing up the other 10 guys, and then I'll come back and we'll, start laying down some additional base coats. So, this is a little different tutorial kind of approach, but I think it'll help get through the site. It'll get the same information across without getting into like YouTube territory where I'm cutting every 20 seconds. So, so we'll see you soon. I'm going to finish these guys up, and then we'll come back and lay down some other base coats and washes and stuff. So see you soon. All right, and we're back. And now that that's leather's all undercoated, I'm going to get metal color burnt iron. And this is a little bit darker metallic. And this I'm going to use to just base coat all the steel elements. So on these guys, it's, you know, the gun. I'm leaving that because that's going to get a brass color instead of steel, just to help it stand out. You want, you know, I want my special weapons to stand out a little bit, and changing the color on something like that is a really easy way to do that. So a little brass on the end there. And then for these guys, I'm also doing the breathing hoses in metallic. The little shoulder pads here, like that. And then of course the helmet. And that is really it. So just getting those metallics and going down the line of models again. And this is not, it's the thing about badge painting and the thing about just kind of, you know, painting infantry in general for an army like Imperial Guard, where of course, you know, you can get as crazy as you want, but oops, I missed some wash there. I'll have to come back and make that up later. Fuel canisters I'm also going to paint in that brass color, but I'll paint the top part of the canister in the steel metallic. So little shoulder pads. Of course, you can get as detailed as you want, but you know, in an army like Imperial Guard or something, where although the details on these models are small, they're not super detailed. Like Cadians aren't super detailed. On these guys, it's just very small details because of the size of the models. Or I should say the details that, you know, you kind of feel compelled to pick out. You can get really detailed on these guys with all the little dials and stuff, but ain't nobody got time for that. But for these guys, you know, that's pretty good. Dude number 3, really just gonna do maybe this part of the main part of this weapon. I'll be painting black, so do that part. Maybe the hose. Oh, I forgot to do the gloves. Okay. And this is a hazard in badge painting too, is just forgetting stuff. So there's a little plate on the back of the hand, and I'm going to paint that in silver as well, or steel as well. Just kind of give it some more interest. And it's not like an organic shape. Like it's just a square on the back of their hands. And so it kind of stands out if you don't paint it a different color. It just looks like a weird square of leather on the back. Like it just doesn't make sense. So better just to paint it a different color. Do the hose there. Shoulder pads. So you can see I'm trying to work my way up. The model. So I'll do the gun, the hands, the breathing hose, and then the shoulder and the helmet. Helmet's the last thing. It's the top of the model, and we're done. So I'll probably have to touch these up later anyway, but might as well just got a little paint on them. So like this hose, back of that hand, the gun, which I still need to hit that with a little brush on airbrush primer, and then the breathing hose, shoulder pads. These are kind of jacked up shoulder pads. I'm not quite sure what's going on with that, but just paint it silver and move on. Oh my gosh, I hope I didn't just get that all over his greatcoat somewhere. Nope, looks okay. Got lucky. And then helmet. Next guy has a grenade launcher. Kind of look blunderbuss looking thing. I always thought this thing looked. I mean, I'm sure it's accurate for the time period, but I always thought it looked pretty ridiculous. In a 40K setting, I think it's ridiculous, but that's fine. Not a big deal. It's clearly a grenade launcher, and it's clearly, part of the aesthetic. So hose, make sure I get the back of the hands. And one of the things about getting that painting order kind of worked out early is it helps you not miss things. So earlier in this tutorial, I mentioned like the 30-second method or the 10-second method, where you're just painting. Like with this, I would just paint the guns on all 15 guys and then go back and then just paint the back of the hands on 15 guys and then do that all the way through. And that's to help me not miss anything, because it often happens when you're doing entire models like I'm doing now. Sometimes you can just miss a glove, or you miss the back of the hands on two guys, and then you go back in with then you start in with the highlight color. But then when you go with the highlight color, you remember, except you can't highlight because the base color isn't there, right? So, it gets frustrating, especially the further into the scheme you get from where you forgot, and the further you have to go back, the more frustrating it is. But so that 10-second method is a good kind of protection against that, or you can just live with it in the inevitability that you do forget something. So, like earlier, I think I forgot the gloves on one guy, so I had to go back and base coat the gloves, wash the gloves, and that took. It's not that took that long, but it's just a break from the flow of what you're doing to go do something. I already had what I'd already mixed had dried up, and so I had to go, mix up some more wash, and it's not the end of the world, but it's just would be more efficient if I just got it the first time. So that's all I'm trying to say. I'm not trying to complain. Just saying it's more efficient to just get it the first time and have that process to get it the first time. there are few enough elements on these of each kind of progression. So they're what I mean by that is there are only 4 or 5 things that I'm painting steel metallic. There are only 4 or 5 things that I painted leather, and so on each model it's easier to just do it's easy to do just like the whole thing at once, right? Versus, let's say, on Rubric Marines or something where you have to make sure to get all the trim painted on every single model. It's a lot better to go, do the lower left leg on everybody, come back, do the lower right leg on everybody, come back, do the upper left leg on everybody, come back. So that's a much more methodical way to do it, but you're less likely to miss something because all you're concentrating on is the trim on half a leg, right? That's all your focus is on. That's a different kind of discipline, though, especially for Rubric Marines, which are extremely challenging models to paint. So, um, you guys, especially, he's got double shoulder pads there on the back of the hand there, and on the helmet. Good. So that's half of them, in 10-ish minutes. Then I'll come back. So I'll finish these off screen, and then come back. God, my hair is just, oh, God, need a freaking haircut. I'll come back and do the highlights on them, and then move on to the next thing. So these are going to rely on oil wash to do the shading on the metallics. So I think I think I did Null Oil, and then Null Oil highlight, and they do get oil wash, but I'm not doing the whole deal with the oil wash. Anyway, I'm gonna keep base coating these guys, come back and highlight the metallics and everything, and that'll get us set up to finish off this segment. We'll come back and we'll do the other details. So thanks, and we'll see you soon. Okay, and we're back, and this time coming back with a little exhaust manifold from Vallejo Metal Color. This is a brighter metallic. Obviously, otherwise I wouldn't be using it for a highlight. But it's still not super bright. It's more like a chainmail than a silver, if that makes sense. So it's typically exhaust manifold is what I'll use for a base coat for steel when I'm doing metallics on like my Blood Angels or something like that. Exhaust manifold will be my base coat color, and then I'll do dark aluminum or something like that. So you can see that this, because the burnt iron is so dark, the exhaust manifold is actually working as a bit of a highlight here. And then when we wash that down, with the oil wash, it'll really become clear. We're just getting a nice contrast now, and then we'll wash it down with the oil wash to get all the definition in the recesses. But right now, and this is this is batch painting. This is 100 infantry style painting here. I'm looking forward to you seeing the end result. I mean, you saw the result at the beginning of at the beginning of the tutorial series. So you know it works. Like, you know that it looks good. But initially, while I'm painting it, you're like, man, that is really not, it's just base coat and wash on the leather. It's base coat, highlight on the metallics. And these are like little corners that you can cut that really add up to save you a ton of time. So cutting out the whole, washing this with Nuln oil step saves me at least a half hour of time. However long it took to do, like 40 minutes maybe is or half hour or so is what it took to base coat all the metallics. Highlights will go faster, obviously, because I don't have to get a full coverage, right? But I cut out the entire wash step. So that saved me, 40 minutes, which makes a difference. If I'm doing, say, 9 batches, 8 or 9, let's say 8 batches, and I'm saving 40 minutes per batch. What is that? Every three batches is 2 hours. So I'm saving, 5 or 6 hours of, like 6.5 hours of painting time over the course of a project. So it all adds up. It all adds up. It all makes a difference. Right. And that is key. That is key to getting armies painted, is figuring out. And you'll see I'll spend a little bit more time on the gas mask. I'll spend a little bit more time, like when I come back through and edge highlight the cloaks and everything. I mean, that there are parts of this that take way longer. But like these little, kind of peripheral metallics, not really something that I need to spend an inordinate amount of time on. Priorities, right? Choose your battles. Otherwise, I end up spending 4 or 5 hours working on the metallics on this batch while I still have the gray coat. I still have the basing. I still have the leather. And the leather took hours and hours and hours to do. Just the initial base coat took hours, so if you get bogged down in, even though you're batch painting, if you get bogged down and kind of overdoing it, it's not necessarily gonna, you can still get lost in it, and you can still overburden yourself with all these different steps, right? And all of a sudden, if you're spending, 4 hours on the metallics and 5 or 6 hours on the leather, and so 30 minutes to base coat the gray coats, but then you spend 3 hours highlighting the gray coats and shading, and then a couple hours on the face mask. All of a sudden you're up at 30, 40 out 20, 30 hours for a 12-man squad, and now you have 120 guys to do, right? So if I even get up to, say, 25 hours all told per 15 guys, let's say, I can't do 30 hours. That's 240 hours of work, right? Yeah. 8 squads for 120, or 8 batches for 120 models at 30 hours a batch which is only 2 hours per model. That's not that much. 2 hours per model is not a lot, right? Um, that's not a lot of time. If you're like, hey, if I can paint infantry models, every model in 2 hours, that's not bad, but it's not great either. But still, 240 hours of hobby time, even for me, and I paint a lot. If I spend 25 hours, let's say 20 hours a week just doing commission painting, which I typically do, maybe a little bit more. That's what, 12 weeks? That's 3 months of work to just paint the infantry on this commission. Then you add the tanks on top of that, right? Now you're into 6 months to paint an army, which for most people is pretty good. 6 months to paint an army is, hey, they would take it, right? I can't spend 6 months painting an army, so I have to develop these techniques to paint more efficiently than that, right? And making these decisions are part of that. And it's all the same tools that I use, to do my higher, characters and stuff like that. I'm still doing oil washes. I'm still doing, edge highlighting and all this. Concentrating more on texture than, precise fades and everything like that. But so there we go. That's, brush control is also a thing. So in 10 minutes, I highlighted the metallics on 15 guys, right? But it's very rough, very choppy. And then at the end, if it's not quite what I wanted to do, like after the oil wash, I can always come back and hit it again with a lighter color or hit it again with exhaust manifold. Like, this is just getting everything moving. It's just getting everything moving along, getting everything on the model start to come together. And then down the line, if something's not working exactly how I want it to, I realize why this is so dark. I forgot to turn on the light in the room because it was so bright on the, anyway. It's just getting everything moving together and getting everything on the model. And then from there, if something's not working out exactly how I want it to, I can come back to it later. But I'm not going to get bogged down second guessing myself midstream, right? Especially not now that I have a batch done. I have proof of concept. I have that it works. I have that it looks good. And so now it's full steam ahead. I'm not going to second guess the process. Even though now I'm like, the leather seems a little dark to me. The leather looks a little dark. I have to go back through my notes and see if I highlighted it or something. Get the other model down, look at it side by side, see if it's really going to matter. Because like these guys are going to be mixed in with other squads, and there's going to be some variation in color and leather across the army. That's just part of how it works. There's variations of red armor in my Blood Angels army. There's just different tones. Sometimes I didn't highlight far enough. Sometimes it's too dark, or maybe it's a little light, or it just happens. And whatever that bandwidth of tolerance for you is, you're gonna save yourself a lot of headaches and a lot of time. My bandwidth used to be very, very narrow. If they were off a shade, I would be annoyed, but maybe I'm just older. Where now it doesn't bother me as much. So, but I think the leather looks good. Metallics look good. I'm going to stop this portion of the tutorial, this video portion anyway, because we're kind of getting into 30-40 minute range. But we are, halfway there, probably. Really, we have just highlighting the cloaks and pants, doing the brass elements, black elements on the, maybe we're less than halfway there. Now that I'm starting to list it out, but that's always, you kind of run down the list of what you have to do. Face mask, eye lenses, brass elements on the guns, highlight the coats, gold elements on the helmets, stuff like that. So and then the oil wash, and then it's just the individual stuff like scorching on the melters and flamers, OSL on the plasma, things like that. So, we still got a ways to go, but cruising through it, you can definitely see it start to come together. Then basing, of course. At this point, we've got the leather pretty much done. We've got the steel metallics pretty much done. We're gonna hit the leather with a little highlight in a bit. But today, what I want to do is knock out the face masks, because that's the next part that's kind of furthest in. So we'll knock out the face masks, and then maybe highlight the leather. We'll see how much time, see how many steps, see how much time it takes for this segment anyway. So this is just eye lenses, and then the actual cloth mask itself. Eye lenses are going to be green to help them stand out just a little bit against the blues and everything, without contrasting too much. I didn't want to do like red eyes or something. There's always something menacing about red eyes. But those are going to be going in just very rough, because you can't really see them. We're not going to be doing like 4-stage highlighting on the lenses or anything like that. So should be fine. And then after that, it's just really just finishing up some metallics and highlighting the jackets, oil wash, basing. So getting there. We're getting there. First things first, P3 Gnarls Green. This is very like woodland green. As always, it doesn't have to be this green, but any kind of true woodland green will work for green eye lenses. I really like this color from P3. I've used it for a long time, so that's why I continue to use it. And the lenses here are they're not incredibly, they're small, they're sunk in there. So I just want to get like, oops. You didn't see what's going on in here? Not really. That should tell you. So just real quick, just a base coat. I mean, we are not spending, because once the mask itself is painted, the eyes are actually really difficult to see. They're really set in there, so you're gonna see how rough we do the eye lenses. So that's like 5 guys right there, and I'm still getting used to this whole batch painting format. I don't care if I get it on the actual lens. I say I'm still getting used to it because the idea is to cut away, come back, and have these all done, but these are all going to be done in like 30 seconds anyway, so and the oil wash is going to come in and shade the recesses in the eye lenses, so I'm not going to do a wash. Excuse me, not going to do a wash. Whereas typically, like if you've seen some of the eye lens tutorials, like for Blood Angels or any of the Space Marines or anything, I'll always do a wash, but not this time. It's just not necessary with the shape of these and everything. So there we go. And then next up, we have another color from P3, but again, it doesn't have to be this color. This is worm green. I know you can't really read that, but worm green, just a lime green. So get a little bit of that on the palette, just a drop. And then come back with the first. Just try to focus on like the the front, kind of lower front part of the lens, but this is not an exact sign. Oh, come on. There we go. What's going on here? Okay. I just want to paint the whole lens. I just want to paint, you know, most of it. But again, this is not a precision. This is not an exercise of precision. This is just getting some bright green eye lenses painted. And then once we base coat the masks, you'll see just how little of the eye lens is visible. So this is one of those things that you could spend a lot of time on, you know, making sure you get the little eye lens and the little, you know, the white mark for the, to simulate kind of the reflectiveness of the glass and all that, you know, the stuff that we usually do on Space Marine tutorials. But you could spend all that time and then you would paint the mask and barely be able to see any of it. And so kind of thinking ahead, looking ahead, planning ahead is always really important when it comes to batch painting, because you don't want to spend that time on things that aren't really going to affect the final outcome. You know? Sorry. Like that is not time well spent. Not on these guys. So we just choose to spend that time elsewhere in more visible areas like leather, like the face mask, cloak, the great coats especially. You know, as long as you nail that great coat, you're really far along with Death Korps. And then it's just a question of filling in the details, which of course is the time-consuming part of any army. If you just airbrush it, you know, you can paint any army really fast, but the devil, as they say, is in the details. Now I'm taking Vallejo model color yellow green. This is a very, you know, neon yellow green. I've used this color before as well. And this is just really the bottommost part of the eye. This is going to give it almost like a glowing, look. But really, it's just to make them stand out against all the kind of other drab elements to the scheme. Because if these lenses weren't bright, they're so sunk in, and they're going to get hit with the oil wash as well. They would really just disappear. So they have to be a very strong color. Because despite everything, we do want to try and keep despite of everything going on with these guys, we do want to keep the focus of the model on the head and, you know, the face area, and between the eye lenses being a really bright green, and then the cloth face mask being a light kind of khaki color, will really help it to stand out. So that's the goal. Oh, that was a little much, but you know, it'll be okay. And I'm just going to base coat right over this for the face mask, so that's why I'm not really being careful at all when it comes to making sure that I stay in the lines with the lenses. It's just not important. And I've talked about that a lot, kind of painting inside out and knowing where you can make mistakes and just fix it later. You don't have to, because if I slowed down and tried not to make mistakes at this stage, it would take longer, you know, versus knowing that it doesn't impact my anything that's I've already painted or that I'm going to paint. All right. And now we get the another P3, Hammerfall Khaki. Just double check and make sure that's what I did. I'm 99% sure. Yep. So I always write this stuff down just to check. I have so many different recipes in my head, and I switch between projects so often that. So Hammerfall Khaki from P3, just a very standard khaki color. What I like about this one is it has really, really good coverage. So it'll cover up all this green. There we go. And we'll do the other side. Now I do want to be mindful that I'm not getting the cloak here, or the greatcoat rather, and I'm not getting the helmet. So that's we're going to be a little bit more careful. And I like this part because this is where I really, really see these coming together, is when this mask gets painted, because now we kind of have all the main elements blocked in. You have the gun, you have the coat, you know, the armor elements, the helmet, shoulder pads, leather elements. Even though they're not all finished, they're not all highlighted and everything. Now you can see where we're headed, right? Which is exciting. So I'm going to finish base coating the rest of these guys and then come back for. I'll probably base coat and wash them, and then I'll come back to do the highlights on the face masks and also on the leather. So we'll see you soon. And we're back after a brief respite. That didn't take too long. I don't know, 20 minutes or so probably. But this is where we're at now with the masks, just getting that base coat of the Hammerfall Khaki, and then just a quick wash with Agrax Earthshade. And then I'm going to be using Vallejo Model Color Deck Tan. To just do and I'm going kind of up. I'm using kind of this vertical. Boom. I'll make sure that I get up here too. So like when I tip them up, you can see that the eye lenses show up, but they're not, especially when the model's just standing there like that on the table, like you're not really going to see the eyes. So that's why we overcorrected. But I don't want this to be solid deck tan. I want there to be a little bit of texture there. Because it is, you know, textured. It is cloth. So Just make sure the paint's nice and thin and, you know, have at it. Similar approach that we'll be doing with the leather highlights. And when this gets oil washed, some of these little cracks and crevices will get shaded a little bit again and just kind of like even everything out. The key here is to just not get bogged down in every little thing that goes on the model. We want overall, we want to keep an eye on the overall picture versus, you know, every little brush stroke. So all right, just finishing these up. It's a nice color though. I like that it's, you know, it's spot on for that khaki kind of canvas look. Fits really nicely with the, you know, with the blue, gray, and the yellow leather. I mean, it's just classic Death Korps, right? And that'll get grimied up a little bit. And then for the leather, I'm coming back with a little yellow ochre from Vallejo Model Color. And thin, real thin, and then again, just real quick kind of external highlights. Some of the casts on this is not great, so just want to be real general. The fingers, and this gives you, this is like you know, those calfskin gloves that you get at the hardware store for doing yard work and stuff. This is, we're kind of going for that look. So, but very thin. I don't want it to overwhelm. I don't want it to overwhelm the ink. But it does add a nice kind of saturation. Makes it stand out a little bit more. And it just kind of looks more, it looks more finished than, so this is just going side to side, right? Just real quick, boom, boom, boom. Just get some fingers, top of the gloves there, top of this little pouch here, you know, the straps on the back, belt, and then, you know, the back of the boots. The back of the boots are going to get touched with the weathering powder and stuff as well, so they're going to be buried in the dirt a little bit. So the boots, like, we don't really want to spend too much time on, but I think it's just a better look for the leather. And again, it's a more polished kind of finished look. We don't want to just do a base coat and wash. That doesn't always look the best. So nice kind of soft yellow leather there, and then I'll do that for the rest of the batch, and then we'll come back and probably do the edge highlighting on the cloaks. Have to do the little Aquila on the helmet. Little details, just little tweaks. The black, then probably next segment we'll come back to the black weapons and the brass on the weapons. So, but all in all, well, with the leather highlight, excuse me, let me grab one of those guys. All in all, these are coming right along. So really happy with these so far. The cloak highlight is gonna have a huge effect, and then on these, like on the melta gun and stuff, when we paint the casing black and do a little brass and stuff, it'll help those stand out. So, but all in all, these are coming along really nicely. So I'll finish up the leather off camera, and we'll be back for another segment. So see you soon. All right, and we're back, having done those highlights, and we're just cruising along at this point. One of the little details that I want to get out of the way before I forget about it is the little Aquila on the front of the helmet. And for those, I'm just taking a little scale 75 Dwarven gold. I know you can't read the label, but trust me. It's just a very warm gold, and it'll show up nicely there on the front of the helmet. These are going to get an oil wash. I'm not doing anything fancy with this. Literally just a little gold on the front of the helmet. So it helps that little detail stand out. There's a lot to be said about painting kind of what's expected for a project like this. Like, you expect to see that Aquila with a scheme like this. You expect it to be gold. And then when we do the oil wash, it'll kind of fill in around that and wear it down a little bit so that it isn't quite so shiny, but also helps to, keep the focus on the head. These little embellishments and stuff, all this is all working to keep the focus, or just draw the eye to the head of the model. So just a little more of that gold. Almost done. And this is also a case where, like, the detail on those is really mushy. Like, they're really small old resin casts. It's just not a great amount of detail there. So I don't like washing and highlighting this. It wouldn't really do anything for me. There's not a lot of there, as they say. Just double check here. Yeah, so excuse me. Now we get to the fun part. So again, moving inside out, the guns are going to be the last things that we actually do on these guys. So now we're going to go through and give the greatcoats a quick highlight. And this is kind of one of the biggest projects, I guess, biggest segments, I guess you could say. So, dark sea blue and pale blue, which is very similar to the, blue, gray, pale. It's just a little lighter. So this is just a quicker shot for getting that highlight color. Is just using the lighter pale blue. And so that's about 2-to-1, maybe 3-to-1 dark sea blue to the pale blue. So I don't know if this is light enough. It might be light enough. So we'll just come in here and we're just going to focus on the outside not light enough. So maybe closer to half and half with those two. There we go. That's closer. Yeah, so here we're just focusing on the folds, a little bit on the knees. You can see there. And then the folds on the fabric on the legs. Doesn't have to be, exact. And then this is kind of an edge highlight here, a little bit on the pocket there. Flip it. Just a quick little line there. There as well. Kind of get the edges of the cloak here, just to kind of define. And we're going to come back and do something cool with the weathering at the end of this that will kind of help the bottom of that cloak along as well too, kind of weather it a little bit. But just a little bit on the folds here. And we want this to be a little bit exaggerated. We don't, we're not going for perfectly blended highlights. And so a little bit on the top of the cuff there, and then just these folds in the cloak. Get up around the collar, of course. Get some definition there. A little bit up here. Edge of the coat. So again, these aren't the most eye-popping highlights, but you can see already it's already making a difference, right? So that's what we really want to see. We just want to see those nice highlights in there. And it could be a little bit lighter mix. Man, I'm running out of that too. It's a good thing I ordered backups for all of these. So again, we'll run through it again here. Quick edge there, edge of the fold, a little bit on the knee. Fabric. Kind of touching up those areas. A little bit on the top of the knee. And this paint's pretty thin, so we don't want, be a little bit more transparent when it dries, but we want to make sure that we're accentuating the areas that we're focusing, with the airbrush. So a little bit of the folds there. Using the side of the brush a little bit more. Around the collar there. Shirt cuff. Top of the sleeve. Shirt collar. Front of the shirt, front of the jacket here. And that's important. Otherwise, you won't get, a sense that the cloak is actually, folded up. And then the oil wash is going to come and settle in all these kind of crevices here and kind of deepen those. deepen those recesses. So that'll help define it even further, and really just bring everything together. I mean, it's really the step that I think makes the whole thing. So a little highlight there, edge of the cloak, kind of the pockets here, top of the arm, same arm, third time now, 3 grenade launchers, but those folds there, kind of back of the collar, a little bit on the shoulder, and then, you know, front of the collar here, front of the jacket there. And once you get, you know, once you get in a rhythm, this tends to go pretty quick. So that might have been a little bit much, but I still don't know that this is really doing enough for me, because once that oil wash goes on too, this will all, my paint might be a little too thin. It might be a little too gradual in some spots. Once the oil wash goes on, it'll filter some of this down. So we want to start with a higher contrast. I've talked about this a lot before, where you kind of highlight beyond, you highlight beyond where you want to end up. And that way, when the oil wash does show up and filter everything down, then you end up where you wanted to be. So you overshoot the mark, right? So I'm going to, I think, work on these first couple guys a little bit more, try and get a little bit more contrast, a little bit lighter mix here. And then I'll go off camera and I'll do the next, you know, dozen. And then we'll come back to basically finish up the guns and do the basing. And finish up the guns, do the oil wash, and then do the basing. So we're getting close. Getting close. So yeah. Thank you. Thanks for your support. As always, if you have any questions, please leave them below so that everybody can see the answers. And when we come back for the next segment, we will finish getting paint on these guys as far as the weapons and the oil wash goes. And then hopefully, you know, finish them up in either in the following segment with the basing. So we're getting real close. I'm excited. I think it's a really good method, and you know, so far a good result. I'm really looking forward to getting to the oil wash stage, so that's really going to turn this whole thing up to 11 and really just kind of bring everything together. Since the last segment, I painted the weapons, just got a little brass and like the black casings. Unfortunately, the recording was done, I didn't realize my mic was on mute. So it wasn't that much, so you know, I didn't re-record with another, you know, batch of models or like prime and black or something. But this is just my typical brass, you know, tinny tin and brassy brass, and then black with intermediate blue edge highlight. Just really straightforward. This will get, you know, influenced by the oil wash, and then I'm going to do some scorching anyway, so you know, it won't really come into play other than just, you know, the tinny tin and the brassy brass on the muzzle. So, but all in all, these are looking really good. I'm really happy with these. So just an oil wash, to, you know, kind of blend everything together. Then just a couple, like the OSL on the plasma and scorching on the Melta and flamers, and then basing. So, you know, pretty straightforward stuff. First things first, we are going to get my stuff out that I should have gotten out before I started recording, but it's right here, thankfully. There it is. Ooh, nope, that's not it. There it is. Almost time to order more of this. I'm going to be using Liquitex Gloss. You can get this from any art store. You can get it from Amazon, of course. This stuff is great. Great for the airbrush. Just no thinning, no nothing. It just shoots real clean right out of the airbrush. And you can see, like, if you're going and looking at these kind of artist materials, they always have these on the back. So preparation, paint, or finish is a finishing product. Is it matte or gloss? It's gloss. Removable or permanent? That's a good one to check. This one's pretty permanent. And then is it transparent or opaque? And we obviously want it to be transparent. So each kind of art material has that on, in case you're curious. Whereas like satin would be in the middle of that gloss and matte kind of sliding scale. So let me just get airbrush out here. Okay. That's good. So a little bit of Liquitex. I do give it a quick shake. Get the water out of the bottom there. Test it on my hand always, and then dry it out. You can see that kind of glossy finish. And then I really just want to concentrate on the coat. I'm not. That doesn't have to be too precise, but I don't need the gloss varnish to go on the metallics or the leather. You can determine. I mean, at this scale, it's not as noticeable, but you can determine how much the material is affected by the oil wash by either how much varnish you put on, what kind of varnish you put on. So like a gloss varnish is going to reduce the surface tension. It's going to be easier to remove. It's not going to, stain or filter the color underneath. We want to keep the blue for the great coats. So we're going to make sure to protect the coats. The gloss will still, the wash will still sit in the recesses, which is exactly what we want. Makes it easy to remove, which is what we want. But for like the metallics on the model and the leathers on the model, I want those to be a little more gritty than. So then I'll try to kind of, airbrush around them when it comes to the gloss varnish. I'm doing an overall oil wash, so everything will get oil washed, but it's a very minor difference. But while I'm at it, I might as well try, because unvarnished, the oil wash is going to have a greater effect on the area. And for the metallics and the leather, that just means that they're going to be a little bit more gritty. So we're doing the oil wash now as opposed to later, because any kind of scorching or weathering, really, certainly plasma glow, any of that stuff needs to be done after the oil wash, especially if you're doing an overall wash, because you don't want that to get filtered down. You don't want that to be affected by the oil wash. Certainly when it comes to things like plasma, you're going to want to get everything established before you do kind of this glowing part. But also for scorching and stuff, you just want it to be independent of the oil wash, really, right? You want chipping and stuff to be under the oil wash, but you want any kind of obviously any kind of pigments or anything like that to be on top of the surface after you do the oil wash. So we're gonna let that dry for just a minute. This is the oil wash that I'll be using. It's my standard black and burnt umber mix. If you want to see how I make these oil washes, I'll link a video in the description for this tutorial, how to make and apply an oil wash for pin washing, and that will walk you through the process of making an oil wash and applying it, because this is really going to be, I'm going to be moving on this. But I keep them in these little Tamiya jars because they seal. They're meant for alcohol-based paints. I'm taking a busted up synthetic brush and mixing this up because oil paints, the pigments do settle at the bottom of the bottle. What makes an oil wash work is the fact that the white spirit that I use, not mineral spirits, white spirits, it evaporates. So if I didn't have a sealed container, I would come back and this would just be oil paint, right? So that's why I use the Tamiya jars. They're super cheap. You can find, I'm sure, glass jars. But this one has like a little plastic insert and it screws down. So it definitely, seals. So I just make a nice big batch of, this is a color I use all the time. So I make a nice big batch of oil wash, and then, I can just grab it and use it like you see here. Gloss varnish is already dry on these. So just going to come in and do a nice healthy oil wash on this guy. The face, I mean, overall, when I say overall oil wash, I mean overall oil wash, right? Both sides, canister, everything. Because Death Korps, gritty, grimy. So you can see it brought out those wraps on the feet again. It's bringing out, folds in the fabric. It's bringing out those folds on the face mask. Now, not all of those are going to stick around once we remove the oil wash, but enough of them will, that it'll add a bunch of definition to the models and a little grit to the models. And Death Korps of Krieg, if they're anything, they are gritty. So this is perfect. But I think you're going to be really impressed and surprised, maybe surprised if you haven't seen this process before, probably a little surprised by what a difference the oil wash will make on these guys. So that's it, just an overall oil wash. Like so. And I'll do the other 10 guys. I'll let this dry for, I don't know, maybe 15 minutes. And then when we come back, we'll remove the oil wash, let that dry, because I'll remove it using white spirits. Let that dry, and then, varnish, and we're on to, final kind of airbrushing. So almost there. Almost there. Then I'll have the first chunk of infantry done for this army, which will, feel really good. So plenty to go. It's the thing about guard, right? Kind of never done painting infantry. But anyway, so I'll come back and finish. And you can see this is already starting to dry a little bit on this guy, but you can see how much better defined the leather is, the areas around the head, the chest. So this is going to pay dividends in just a minute. So come right back. And these guys will be all washed and dried. See you in a second. Okay, and we're back. And now you can see the oil wash is dried. And these guys are dark, gritty, which we're shooting for, but maybe not quite that gritty. So just a little white spirit in the cap there. Get some Q-tips out. Dip the Q-tip in the white spirit, and then you see how easy it comes off the cloak, or the coat, rather. Pants. All right, that's it. It's that easy. Not pressing very hard. You do not want to press hard. You don't have to press hard. The oil wash will just come off. There's the white spirit kind of reactivating and just pulling that mix off the high points, leaving it in the recesses. You can see better definition on the helmet, better definition on the Aquila, the eyes, the face mask. I mean, it just helps everything, right? Better definition on the shoes, I mean, the pants, the folds in the cloak or the greatcoat. I mean, everything. It just helps everything. So, yeah. Oh my gosh. That would have been tragic if I had spilled. Not as bad as spilling like Microsol and Microset, which is terrible. You have to like leave that area of your house when you spill those. Okay. All right, so we have like 10 more guys to go. So I'll do this, do a couple more, and then I'll do the rest just off camera real quick. Give them a quick matte varnish, and then just do the scorching. Look at that. Okay, the highlights aren't quite that stark in person. I'm not quite sure what the camera is doing there. Maybe the gloss is kind of accentuating that a little bit, but they're not that crazy. Okay, so I'll do the rest of these guys off camera, and then give them a quick matte varnish, and we'll be right back to do the scorching and the plasma. So we'll see you soon. All right, so now that we got the oil wash taken care of, everybody's at basically this stage here. Nicely defined, looking good. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put off to the side all the models that don't need any more work before basing. So grenade launcher guys off to the side, little random, artillery crew guy, grenade launcher, lots a lot of grenade launchers. Left with flamers, plasma, a couple more flamers, and then, melta, and then just a little bit of plasma. So I think first this and this, and really this can be, any kind of combo. This isn't an exact, science with the plasma OSL, but this is a blue that I usually use. I'm using blue because it's really going to pop against, you know, the blue-gray, but it's complementary. It's not going to be too crazy, but it's going to be like the only bright thing in the army is going to be this OSL. So where it does show up, it's really going to show up. I did some Lehman Russ plasma executioners, and they are definitely going to stand out in the army. But you know, especially for this client, that's a good thing. I would just go with like regular brass or gold coils on plasma for this army if I were doing it personally, just because for Death Korps, I think it fits my aesthetic better, for that to be understated. But this client, you know, wants the OSL, so that looks good too. So this is Game Air Magic Blue, which is just a really nice kind of true blue. Get it on the back of the coils there, and then just use a card, keep things all right. Because I don't want the plasma. I just want it around the gun. I don't want that like glowing on the chest. Sorry, I thought I dragged the water bottle across the needle, but I think I did it over the cup, so we're good. Over the needle would be bad. Then Model Air Light Sea Blue, again, just a really nice light baby blue. Since I'm only doing one plasma gun, this is going to go pretty quick. We're going to come back here. Since I'm spraying away from the model, I don't need the mask, obviously. Just need to make sure not to get it on his, you know, on his arm. And then just a little glow in the back. Come back with the card again. Just concentrating in the middle of the plasma coil. Get a little of that blue out of there. So here's a trick. I'm leaving. So I sprayed a little bit of water in there. So now I have this kind of blue, light blue water, which I'm now going to add a little white. So the water is going to, you know, obviously thin the white to where this is Vallejo model color white. This is the only white that I use, really. It's going to thin the white to where it can be airbrushed, but also leaving that little tiny bit of blue in there is just going to take, you can see like on the edges here, it's not pure white. It's tinted just a little bit with that baby blue. And that will help with just how severe that OSL glow is going to be. If you use just pure white, it's a little much. So just that, even just that little tiny bit of blue is really going, I mean, it's still going to glow, like you'll see here in a second. Oops, we're still not really into the white there. There we go. Nice glow, but not like crazy levels of pop, as they say. Just a nice blue OSL. And then clear out the cup. Time to do a little scorching. And then these guys will be ready for basing. I mean, we are pretty much done with the painting. I'm going to base these guys, well, you'll see on the next video. But I'm not moving them off their bases. I'm going to be basing them where they stand. But that's getting my head of myself. So FWE, black, and burnt umber for the scorching effect. Now heat burn, I don't. This is my preferred way of doing kind of muzzle burn, heat warping, not warping, but typically you'll see, kind of a Technicolor effect, which I do not like because really that only happens on heated like chrome. This is more like a soot kind of scorching effect. So I start with the umber. Now on the brass, it doesn't make that noticeable of a difference, but it does change the tone of the brass a little bit. It darkens it down a little bit. And this is just a real thin pass over the front. I try to keep it to like the front 2/3 of the housing, but sometimes that's easier than others. And with the umber, it's less of an issue. So oops, gosh darn it. That was a lot. So less there. Hang on. I think I hear one of my kids coming. Oh, there they are. Hang on 1 second. Joy's working from home. All right, Joy's from working from home. They're very cute though. Honestly, I was surprised I don't get interrupted more. So now we have the umber down. Like you can't. It's not that big of a change, but it is meaningful. Like if you skip that and you just go straight to the black, it's not. It's not. It's just two. It's just one note, right? Where that makes a bigger difference is when you're doing non-metallic gun barrels. Like I have, well, they're packed up right now, but some Death Korps of Krieg artillery that I did this on as well. Oh wow, I am almost out of this. Crazy. Okay, time for an Amazon order for FW inks. I didn't think I used these this much. Okay. All good. I don't need that much of it. So now I have the black ink, unthinned. This is just straight out of the bottle. And now I'm going to try to do just really like the front like 1/3 of the melta gun. And now you can see, I'll have to paint the inside black. I missed that obviously, but now you can see it's like just a little scorching front third. Make sure to get all the way around. Sometimes I'll forget, like if I miss the top, it is really obvious. And now you see on that flamer, again, just a little bit of scorching. Okay, I need to move now because the ink's gonna start to dry in the pot, and that is not ideal. So front third, front half. The rule of thumb that I use for little gun barrels like this, and I do this to any kind of fire weapon. So flamers, melta. Sometimes, depending on, I do like Gatling cannons. I'll do it. Artillery, things like that. I definitely don't do it on anything with like a bolt. But it just adds a nice little bit of realism, I think, to to the model. The guns don't look brand spanking new, you know. I like the look a lot. I think it's great. And then the most important, well, pretty much the most important thing there is the matte varnish. So right now, when you airbrush, inks, they are going to dry typically a little bit more satin or even gloss. Like in this case, FW inks are pretty glossy. Oh god, I just got matte varnish on my pants. Son of a bitch. There we go. So you don't want, like, the soot is matte, right? So that's going to be, even though the metal under it is shiny, the soot is going to be matte, and that's going to matte down the end of the weapon, and that just gives it a more natural look, especially when you're doing like longer gun barrels and stuff. So you're like, look at that, that looks good. I'm happy with that. That is a good looking Kriegsman right there. I'm pumped. Pumped, I tell you. All right, I am ready to do 50 more of these guys. I like my job. What can I say? This is a good size batch, though. I'm liking this size. It's 14, 15 model batch. I'm digging it. We're going to be finishing off the batch painting Death Korps of Krieg tutorial series with some basing. And so here I have the most recent batch. Here are the first couple rows. And then behind it is the batch, basically the color test batch that I did. I wanted to show kind of how you can get a consistent result across batches with using, recipe and that kind of having a formula, having a plan, following the plan. One of the things about this particular recipe, it's like this is the first batch that I did, the color test batch. Here's the second batch that I just finished. Pretty close. I mean, the heads, helmets, leather, all really, really close. This guy's cloak's a little bit lighter. This is the new guy. Newest batch, original batch. A little lighter. But, I mean, cleaner, too. Pretty close. Look at these guys. Real close. Really, really close. So this is the new batch, original batch. So they're certainly close enough. Like if I pan over, the group of these guys, they're gonna look like they're in the same army. And with a recipe like this, where I'm mixing, I basically have two colors I'm mixing to get the highlight colors. You're gonna have some variance across models, and that's fine. Obviously, you don't want it to be too far apart, but you're going to get some variance, and you're going to get some variance like in the real world as well, right? Not everything is going to look exactly the same. Not everybody's in parade dress, on the battlefield. So, it happens with like this scheme. It'll happen with, it's something I used to get really hung up about, but I've learned to kind of let go of because it doesn't make that big of a difference across an army, right? Obviously, you want to get as close as you can, but like my Blood Angels armor is done over appreciate with an ink, and they're all really close, but my aggressors are a little darker than my Primaris tanks. It's fine. It's not like I was going to repaint their aggressors or something. So, there's just a little variation. But when they're on the table, when you're gaming with them, when they're, even when they're displayed, like it's not, if they're not that far apart, especially these guys are all going to be mixed in together, it'll be fine. So, not something I'm worried about. Not here to talk about, variants in highlight colors necessarily, but I just wanted to show you that. So what we're going to do today is actually basing. And for these guys, I'm not going to sculpt, I'm not going to make separate bases for all these guys, break them off, pin them to the other bases. It's just incredibly time consuming. For Death Korps, you want that kind of like muddy, kind of worn, sunken in, heavy feel to them. So I'm going to be just basing them, where they stand on their bases. I'm going to try and keep the base material thin, and that way we're not overwhelming the shit. Hey everyone, it's Colin with Legalized Mischief Productions. Thank you for joining me and welcome. And today we're going to finish up the Batch Paint Death Korps of Krieg tutorial series, and we're going to do that with basing. So it's really all that we have left is basing and a little bit of pigment work. For these models, what I have here, I have the most recent batch that we just did the tutorial on. That they're in the front here, and then behind them is the original batch that I did. And I have them both here because one, I haven't based the original batch yet, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then I also wanted to show how, by doing batch painting and by having a recipe, writing that down, having a kind of order of operations, following the plan, how you can get very consistent results, right? So just picking two guys, I don't want the plasma to be a distraction, pretty close. This guy's a little lighter. Back of the cloak, really close, right? Old guy, new guy, real close. Again, this guy's probably a little lighter than this guy. Not much. Metallics look the same, face masks look the same, eye lenses, leather look, obviously close enough. Really, really close. So I'm super happy with that. I think for an army, that's the goal, right? You want them to be that close together. I'm going to be painting over 100 of these guys. There's going to be some variation, especially with a recipe where I'm mixing two colors to make the highlight color for the greatcoats. It's going to be a little different. So when these guys are all mixed in together, when they're on the table, when they're based, like it's not enough of variance to really stand out, and that's really the goal. When I was, it used to be something I really get hung up on, would be this uniformity, and everything has to look exactly the same. And one, that's not how things are, right? Not everybody's in parade dress on the battlefield, and two, it's not really realistic to expect that. So little variation is good. Obviously, the goal is to get the most consistent output that we can, but especially when especially when we're mixing colors, that's hard to do. It's why in a lot of my recipes, especially army painting recipes, it's why I try not to mix colors for highlights and stuff like that. I try to just use out of the bottle colors because there's less of that variance, right? Like my Ultramarines recipe doesn't have any mixing. It's all just straight colors. And so pretty much every Ultramarine that I paint looks exactly the same. Which is great when you're painting Ultramarines, right? When I'm painting my Blood Angels, that's a little different. That's done with a colored pre-shade and ink over the top. So if the volumes of the pre-shade or the colors of the pre-shade aren't exactly the same on every model, that ink isn't shot the same on every model, you're going to end up with some variation. Like my aggressors are a little darker than my repulsor tanks. It happens. So, it's just not something that I don't think anymore. I don't think it's worth getting hung up on. So, for me, certainly when they're together like this, it's not going to matter. So I'm super happy with this. I'm really happy with where these models are. And now for the basing, I'm not going to, again, this is a commission project, but also just for armies in general. Usually if the base is more complicated and more involved, I usually do the base separate, paint the models on a painting base, and then I'll break them off and pin them on the main base. Well, a couple considerations go into why I chose the basing scheme that I did for the Death Korps. One is time. That's very time consuming to make the bases separately, paint them, and then cut these guys off, pin them onto the new base. Right, extremely time consuming. Second thing is these are all resin models. Cutting them off their painting bases could damage them. You can break a leg, you can break weapons, you can, arms will fall off. That adds a lot more time. And their feet are really small, right? So pinning these guys to a new base is going to be an enormous pain in the ass. So all of those things, it just introducing so many failure points along the way that it's just not. I don't think it's worth the extra uh, outcome for the bases, which is like it's a little more efficient, and they're standing on top of the dirt instead of sunk into the dirt a little bit. But especially in this case, I think we're going to be fine. Death Korps, you want them kind of in the mud, in the dirt. It's not going to be mud, but you want them in the dirt. You want them kind of heavy. You want a heavier feel to the infantry. So for that reason, we're going to use just their regular base. And for basing, I'm going to use some stalwart products from Games Workshop, Agril and Earth and Agril and Badland. Agril and Badland is the kind of sandy texture one. And Agril and Earth is the crackle. So they have a million tutorials on this stuff. Games Workshop website, you can see examples and all that. I like them. They work really well. I'm using 2 because I want some variation in the ground cover. I want a little variation to give it a more natural look. So that's why I'm using 2. And then first things first, though. So because I'm using a crackle, and the paint is actually, when it dries, it's actually going to split, and there are going to be channels between the paint. This can't be black. It looks weird when the paint splits. So even though I'm going to do a wash over the top, even though I'm going to do some pigments over the top, I just want to be sure. So typically what I do is I would airbrush all these bases beforehand, and then I would do the texturing and all that stuff, and then I pin the models. But again, we're not doing that. Just to backtrack for 1 second, one of the reasons I chose Agril and Earth and Agril and Badland over like other companies like AK, Vallejo, things like that. These Games Workshop paints, I think, are a really nice color. Some of those other ones are either too dark or too light, or this is a really nice, like, middle of the road, like, dirt color. And it's a nice canvas to just, like, you'll see when we go through the tutorial, couple acrylic washes for a little variation, and then a pigment wash, and this thing's done. Like, it's just efficient because I don't have to mess with the ground cover color. Like I use different products when I for my desert basing, for my Blood Angels. I use AK, but they're the sandy texture one and the crackle are like a little different colors, so I have to paint that, and it's a more involved process, right? And I want to skip all that because I'm trying to be efficient with this project. So these are all the considerations that go on as to why I'm going with a certain base scheme, a certain army, certain products. So, just wanted to review those before we get started. That way, that way you know the why, not just this is what I use. Okay, but why? Why did you make those decisions? So that's important to me to communicate to you. So first things first, because we can't have these bases be black, a little bit of Doom Bull brown, and this is thick. So I'm just going to get my water, some water in there, shake it up. And now I'm not going to paint the entire surface of the base again. That would take forever. I just need to make sure that when I come back to do the like the crackle paint, that I'm not putting crackle over the areas that are going to be black. I need to make sure that I stay on the areas that are Doombull brown. It's going to be most of the base. You'll see. So I'm just painting, straight out of the pot because, this is just for bases. Nice big brush. This is a 2. I wish I had something a little bigger, but this will have to do. And then, this is not thin enough. This doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to not be black. So, maybe a little thin. Oh, God. Come on. A little rust. Never hurt anybody. So kind of near the feet. There we go. So that's enough, right? I don't need to get in here and do... This doesn't take that much longer to just do it around the whole thing. Not cutting corners. Okay. 1 down. 20 something to go. Now the little gap in the slot of base there, which I haven't seen one of those in a while. I'll just put a nice glob of the Agril and Badland on there, and that should fill that in because it's so thick. Should be fine. If it's not, I'll find a tuft and I'll put a tuft over it. You can put a tape over it if it's a big gap. That gap is so small that the basing material should, operative word, famous last words, should. Basing material should cover that. So, and this is it. Big old brush. So I'm going to sit here but you see, it's like 10, 15 seconds per model. This is not the most arduous painting task in the history of the world. Just want to make sure you don't have any paint on your fingers when you go to pick up the next model. Kind of rub your fingers. Otherwise, you will get paint on these, finished models. Another reason why I don't typically do basing under the model is because the model's painted. Like, it's done. I really don't want to have to go back and touch anything up, right? So, and for me too, I'm just kind of an impatient guy in general, but like especially I'm a pretty impatient painter in the sense that when I finish painting a model, I want it to be done. So I'll typically paint the bases before I even start painting the bases. I'll do like a batch of bases before I even start painting the model. I'll start working on the base. That way, when I'm done painting the model, I just put it on the base and do the final, pigments or whatever, and it's done. I don't have to wait for the base to be done. But it's not a hard and fast rule. Obviously, it's hard to have in this hobby with how many different situations and projects and stuff there are. So that's the plan for those. This might be a little thin, but again, it's fine. So I'm going to let that dry, and I'm also going to do the rest of this batch. And then when we come back, I'll show you how I apply the textures to the bases. So we'll see you soon. Okay, so got the Doombull Brown down on the bases, and we're already looking better. What I'm going to use for the texture paint, I have a paint stirrer from Tamiya. These are really, really clutch. I really like the little scooper on one end, and then it has just like a paddle, like a little flat blade on the other end. Not blade, it's not sharp. But this is what I use to, spread basing material. And then just a really old, chunky, busted ass brush for the Agrellan Earth. So we'll get zoom out here. Jeez. Agrellan Badland, and we're actually going to give it pretty vigorous. There we go. Shake. And now the Agrellan. Oop, hey, come on. Stupid pots. I swear to God. So a little bit of Agrellan Badland. That's good for that guy. Pop that bubble down there. Oh, okay. Now I don't want to build this up too high. Like I don't want a really thick layer of this because I don't want them to be, sinking into the mud. For this base, this Slaughter base in particular, it's important to use the Agrellan Badland over those areas because the Agrellan Earth is going to flatten out on the base. It's just what it's supposed to do. It's like self-leveling, so it's not going to maintain any of that height. So this guy's base is going to be mostly Agrellan Badland, but we're going to leave some room for the Agrellan Earth. There we go. I'm not intentionally getting on his shoes, but boots. So I'm just going to spread that out. And I'm going to work in small batches for this part. I'm not going to do this to all, 26 or whatever models that I have here right now. Just going to do, maybe 4 or 5. I want to make sure that the Agrellan Badland isn't dry by the time I go to do the Agrellan Earth. So now what I'm going to do is give the Agrellan Earth a good shake, come back to that first guy. You can see it's starting to dry a little bit, but what I want to do is get some of that Agrellan Earth and then just fill in the areas that don't have Agrellan Badland. But I'm going right up next to the Agrellan Badland. And I want to kind of feather the edge between the two a little bit. That way there isn't like a hard line. If I were to let the Agrellan Earth, if I were to let the Agrellan Badland dry and then come back with the Agrellan Earth, there would be like this hard line between. That's not what I want. And here I can also kind of get some of that off of the boot. This is the guy in the Slaughter base, so I do want to be careful. At the end of the day, if there's something I miss, it is not something, there's nothing a tuft Nothing a tuft can't take care of. Well placed tuft. So just filling in around. So again, not a ton of texture. You know, these shoes, he's not like sunk into the mud per se, but you know, a little bit of texture never hurt anybody. So a little bit of weight. So that's it. That's the process for that part. I'm gonna go through and do, you know, probably like four or so of these guys at a time, 4 or 5 of them at a time. Depends on, you know, first pass is always a little patchy. Then you get some momentum going. So and some of these, you know, some of them will have more aggro in earth, some of them will have more aggro in badland. The more variation you have, you know, which I talk about all the time, the more variation you have, the more natural it looks. So mix it up. Try to avoid straight lines. So you don't want the, you know, you don't want those to settle in the slot of base. Outline. Okay. That worked. All right. So that's 4 more. And it is important to shake that aggro in earth. You can't just open these pots and just start using them, because the mediums that they use to, you know, bind all this material together does separate. It does settle. It does separate, especially with a new pot. You don't know how long it's been sitting on the store shelf or in somebody's stock room before they mailed it to you. So you just want to give it a really good shake. Even the gritty stuff, or like with the Tamiya, you know, if it were the snow or something, you can mix it with the paint mixer little tool. I'm not big on like those little bespoke, you know, hobby tools. I think that a lot of them are kind of superfluous, but that one I love. That one I have a million uses for. So you see, these 4 are going a lot quicker than the first 3. And this is just the process. We just repeat this, small batches. And then this will dry. I'll let this dry overnight. I mean, it usually takes, you know, a couple hours, an hour. Depends on how warm it is in the room you're hobbying in, but not bad. So now we have, you know, this one's starting to dry a little bit around the edges, you can see, but still plenty of ways to go. So I'm going to finish the last, you know, 17 of these guys or whatever. And then when we come back, we'll start doing a couple little washes before moving on to some pigment work. So see you soon. Okay, so I've finished the bases on the rest of the models, and it has since dried. And what we're left with as far as basing texture is, you can see here we have a really nice kind of variation of this built up sand here, and then the crackle, little crackle back there. So this kind of texture. Now, interestingly enough, the Agrelin Badland does, if you put it on thick enough, it does crack as well. So, but here you have that nice kind of cracked, dry earth look through here as well. So just a little bit of variation, and you see they're slightly different. This is a little bit lighter than this, but you know, imperceptible, really. So now what I'm going to do is I am going to take Vallejo Model Wash Oiled Earth. This is an acrylic wash, just meant to give a little bit of different tone to the dirt, the earth, and then European dust. So it's just two browns that we're going to use. You can see, everybody scooch back. Kind of have just a dark, like a medium brown and a lighter brown. And for these, what I'm going to do is just kind of work back and forth. I'm going to work that dark brown on top of the kind of raised portions there. Maybe some over here. Come back, grab some of that light brown. Right. I'll just kind of darken that up a little bit. Really want to get into creases. I'm going to need a lot more wash on my palette here. And again, this is very fast and loose. This is not a precise application here. So the darker brown kind of on the Agrelin Badlands, and then the Agrelin Earth gets a little bit more of the lighter brown. And we're just going to do this on all of these models. And then when this is, by the time we're done, the first models will be beginning to dry. And then we can get in here with some of the pigment work and really finish these off nicely. And I'll probably finish this, let this dry, throw some tufts around here or there, and then do the pigment work. You always want to do the tufts before the pigment. So again, you can take washes that are further apart in color. These are pretty close, so I'm not getting a ton of mileage out of using two different inks, or excuse me, washes, not inks. Inks are too saturated, but a little variety never hurt anyone. It's not like not like we're being super precise. So I'm gonna get, this is gonna dry, because the nice thing about a wash is it's still gonna dry matte. So you see there, jeez, come on. Sorry. So you see there, there's a little variation. Part of it's that this is still wet a little bit, but one of the main reasons I like doing this is because it really does bring out the cracks in the agrelin earth. Those get nice and dark, whereas on something like this, the cracks, this is without the wash, cracks aren't quite as noticeable. Now what I wanted to show here, which I almost forgot, see how you can't see that real well. Let's see if I have a better example. Never start a sentence with see how and then you can't actually see what's going on. So if you look in here, you can see that Doom Bowl brown in those cracks. If we hadn't done the Doom Bowl brown, like here, especially if we hadn't done the Doom Bowl brown, those would just be black. And so it would be really stark, which of course is not the look we're going for with that. So it's a really good thing that do the Doom Bowl brown. It can seem a little unnecessary because we are just going right over it with like paint and pigment, but it does make a difference. Like especially on this model, I know you can't really see under the cloak, but there's some very pronounced cracks underneath this guy, and it would really stand out if they were black instead of that Doom Bowl brown. So it's something that I see people do with the crackle paints, and it's just a very it's one more step, but it's I think a very necessary step is to paint that undercoat, depending on what technical paint you're using over the top. So you know me, I'm not one for extra steps or unnecessary steps, but that one I think is spot on. So generous wash. Perfect. Okay, I'm going to finish these guys, and then, look, this one's already pretty much dry. So we'll be right back, and we'll do some Tufts and some Pigments. So see you soon. Okay, and we're back, and now we're going to be moving on to Tufts. All the ink is dry, so you see the cracks are more pronounced. This is a little darker. Overall, the bases are just a little darker, which is what I wanted. And it's not, a little darker, a little lighter. It's not the most profound development in the history of basing, but it does make a difference. So I'm not just going to leave it Agrelin Earth and Agrelin Badlands. Little super glue just on a spare base that I have here, and then my little hook tweezers that I use for this. And I'm going to use some Desert Tufts from Mini Nature. Oops, it's Tufts of Desert from Mini Nature. These are more of a dark, really dark brown. So these will go nicely, I think. One of the things I like about Mini Nature is that variation in the tuft. They're not all just round. They're not all kind of uniform shapes. They're all different kind of shapes and sizes. So it gives it a more natural look. So just take it off there. Pick up a little bit of super glue. And right on the base. And that looks good. I like that. I was a little concerned. Not going to lie. Little concerned about how that was going to look in practice. But I think it looks good. I'm digging it. This is a little fuzz from the Q-tip that got left over. Okay, make sure we get that. And now I'm not doing this on every base, right? I'm just going to do a few bases here or there just to get enough kind of differentiation, enough variety. But it definitely does not need to be on even a majority of bases. We can just make sure that we're mixing up, you know, front of the base, back of the base, different sides of the base, different size tufts. Because you can kind of get into a rhythm and then you look at back and, you know, half the models have a tuft just right in front of their foot. So I want to make sure we're not falling into any kind of patterns like that. But all right, I think that's good. Do just a couple more. And then we move on to the fun part, which is pigments, and then we'll be done. Base rim, of course. Let's see. But these guys are close, real close. All right, just a couple more. And there's some flat areas. Let me see if I can find another one here. Like this. Let's grab. So there's some flat areas on the base where like the texture, maybe the aggro and earth didn't go on. You see like right between his feet there. Didn't go on very thick, so you didn't really get any crackle. So we're just gonna put a tuft right there, obscure that, and voila. No longer an issue. So we'll put that away and make a note that that's the tuft that we're using with that basing scheme. So when it comes to, you know, especially larger models, and just the next batch, a couple batches of models, make sure we're using a consistent tuft for that. So I'm going to grab my pigments here. Let me see. There we go. And trusty notebook. Let me see what exactly I have planned. Oh, that's not it. That's not it. Writing down stuff is good as long as you can find it later. That's not it. Okay. What was I using? I was using. I'll check my other notebook and then check back in just a second. Okay, sorry about that. I found what I was looking for, and so we're going to be using a pigment wash to finish off these bases. And what that's going to do is it's going to let those pigments kind of settle into the basing material. They're not necessarily just going to be sitting right on top of it. They're going to be integrated into the basing material and just give a lot of textural variation and some color variation. I'll be using clay brown from Secret Weapon Miniatures, which is a very pale brown, and then almost like a fleshy kind of brown, and then dark earth, also from Secret Weapon Miniatures. This is more of a red brown. You notice neither is close to the existing basing color. That's fine. We wanted kind of a malleable canvas, you could say, like it's going to accept the pigments, and the pigments are really going to make this more interesting. If we did, a similar color brown wash, we would just end up with kind of brown on brown on brown on brown, and that can get real boring real fast. So what we're going to do is this pigment wash to give some variation, some color variation and texture. So we're going to be using isopropyl alcohol for the wash. It mixes really well with the pigment. And then I'm going to be using this metal palette. God, I cannot think today. I'll be using this metal palette to make the wash. So a little isopropyl. The isopropyl also evaporates really quickly. And you can manipulate the wash after you're finished with the isopropyl instead of using like pigment fixer or something like that where it's set in stone. With this, you can manipulate it even after it's evaporated. So that's another plus. But by and large, and you can always add more isopropyl, but you want a good amount of pigment on the palette. You can see it's kind of grainy. That's fine. And then here with the dark earth. This also serves as kind of a fixer. I prefer to use pigment fixer normally on when I'm doing like dry pigments. The difference between dry pigments and what I'm doing here is dry pigments will just kind of sit on top of what I'm applying them to. With a pigment wash, it's going to go down into the basing material. So this will be a fixer enough for our purposes. Ooh, this needs more alcohol. This is probably good. So again, kind of the same thing I did with the wash, but much kind of looser. Darker wash on the ground, and then the clay brown more on the cracked earth. And you'll see here, see, let's get a little bit more of this isopropyl in there. Okay. Just making a proper mess at this point. So that's how we do it. So a little clay brown. You can see this is separating down. So just pick up some pigment from the bottom. And it doesn't look like much, but when this dries, it's going to be pretty striking. A little bit of that brown dark earth. And we always want to do the tufts and stuff beforehand because we want the tuft to, get involved with the pigments as well. Do I have a larger brush? Because it's going to take forever. Nope. Okay. Yeah, this brush will work, actually. Just a normal bristle kind of trash brush here because that little tiny brush was going to take forever to do all these bases. So a little heavy on the dark earth. I can just put a little bit of that clay brown over the top. And this is just kind of moving back and forth between the two pigments. Very loose. I don't even need to cover the whole base. If I get some on the shoes, I get some on the shoes. Not a big deal. Whoa, that I don't necessarily want. So this is much more winging it than any kind of planned, precise, application here. So there we go. And that first one is drying. The isopropyl will dry pretty quickly. So we'll see some results here. And I will show you what that looks like. So you can see kind of what we're aiming for here. And just kind of the variation that you can get by doing just a quick pigment wash. So this isn't anything that, you know, requires any kind of special skill or approach. This is, you know, just a little bit of practice. You really want, like looking at you can't really tell on the camera, but these washes have, you know, kind of separated. This is going to be, you can see how little pigment, if I'm just picking up off the top, you can see how little pigment is in that wash. Whereas if I go down to the bottom, there's much more. So that's why I'm kind of swishing, mixing. I'm mixing over to the side to get some of that pigment out of there before I go to the brush or before I go to the base. So the density of, you know, the pigment that I'm picking up in the brush, like that all changes. It's constantly changing. It's not one, it's not the same kind of saturation of pigment on each base or even on each, you know, type of terrain. So the more variation, as always, the more variation, the more natural it's going to look, and the more kind of random that is, especially in this case with this kind of basing, then the more natural it's going to look as well. So just want to be mindful of how quickly the isopropyl is evaporating off the palette, because this will get down to just basically back to dry pigment once the isopropyl evaporates. And of course it's evaporating, you know, faster than we can really apply this to the model. So something to keep an eye on. We can always put a couple more drops. But again, this is a quick application, but the bases, like I'm excited to show you the bases because they look a lot more polished. I think you could say they look a lot more polished than, you know, this technique of just kind of mashing isopropyl alcohol and pigments on the base would maybe lead one to believe, just looking at them, which is brilliant, which is what, you know, that's the goal, is to make models look like they took you longer than maybe they did. Because really, you know, I try to paint armies. I come at it from an army painting perspective. And that's my style. So I'm always looking for techniques like this, trying things out to where I can say, okay, so I can get a really cool, varied kind of dirt look with just an isopropyl pigment wash. Like there's no dry brushing, there's nothing. And this helps too because we didn't actually have to, so I just need a little bit more clay brown on the palette. We didn't actually have to paint, you know, after we did the initial, ooh, that's a bit much. After we did the initial Doom Bowl brown, we didn't actually have to paint any of this. You know, we're just doing a series of washes, basically. Pigment wash at the, you know, the two acrylic washes, and then a pigment wash at the end. And that's essentially it for these bases. So we're not really risking, like if I would try to dry brush this, there would be a risk to the parts of the miniature that we'd already finished. The shoes, the cloak, or the greatcoat rather. We would be risking, I'm gonna mix some of this in to loosen it up. We'd be risking, or at least with, you know, my dry brushing skills, I'd be risking getting some of this pigment, or not this pigment, some of the paint on, you know, the shoes of coat of those models. But this way, if I get a little pigment on the shoe, that's good. That works. It integrates it into the base. It's fine. Not a big deal. And then we're actually almost done with these. So I'm watching that base carefully. It's almost dry. We're just going to finish this up. And then I'm actually going to show you another cool little technique here. But after this, it's just, you know, woo, hey. Base rims, really. Okay, there we go. Might get out the hair dryer to speed that last bit up. But I'm just getting warm in here, so it's evaporating faster. But a couple drops, like that one bottle of isopropyl will last me probably the rest of my modeling, you know, scale model career there. Just a few drops at a time. Okay. It's going to be cool. There we go. Okay, two more. Push, push, push. This was a basing scheme that I originally had for Star Wars Legion, for the clone trooper army that I had. But I thought it would work really, really well with this palette. And you can use, you know, a similar approach. Just change the technical paints and change the you know, the washes and the pigments, and you can get totally different looking bases. Now I'm going to grab a paper towel and just kind of wipe this off. Dry pigments, very bad, very dangerous. Wet pigments, you know, they'll still stain clothes and stuff, but not as big of a risk of spilling. You can see like these pigments here, just wiping off. So done and done. Turn that to the box, and then there it is. Give me 1 second. I'm going to mute this so I can dry out that base. Okay, that was warm. And so here we can see finished base. I think where the Agrelin Badlands is probably still a little wet. We're not dry yet. but we're starting to see some of that clay brown with the light brown, the darker, dark earth pigment there. Just some really nice variation on the base. And that is carried through on, if you check, picture the Instagram or the Facebook on the tank treads, I use the dark earth and the clay brown pigment washes. If, on the artillery, same thing. In that all yeah, that all ties everything together, right? That's a way that we can tie the basing on the infantry into the tanks, the artillery that aren't on bases, by using this pigment wash with this clay brown and this dark earth. So this tone of clay brown and this tone of dark earth will show up on the independent pieces and bring the whole army together. And that's something that's, I think, really important in basing. Is if you can integrate, like, all my Blood Angels are all in desert basing, but then, on the Land Raider, on the tracks is the same sandy pigments that are on the bases. So I do a pigment wash on the wheels of the bikes with the same wash and pigment that I use on the bases. So we're integrating it into the base, and integrating it with the rest of the army, giving it a cohesive look. So all that's left after this is the base rim and the kind of ceremonial last little bit of painting before you can call them done. It's one of my favorite parts of painting, is painting the base rim, because that means I've finished another unit, either for myself or for a client, and it's time to move on to the next thing. For me, right now, that means more Death Korps infantry. So there's a lot in this project. But I use P3 Thamar Black for all my base rims. It's a nice, it's more satin. It's have a little bit of satin to it, but it's a very durable black. It covers anything. It goes on really nicely, but it does have a little satin finish to it. And it's just what what I like the best. So, boom, little Thamar Black, and we are done. We'll let that dry, and then we'll go look at the first finished infantry models for this project, which is really exciting. Only 100 more to go. Something like that. Maybe not that many, maybe 80-ish. We'll see. I haven't fully counted. But I think I have a good pace. I'm really happy with the time investment in these versus the output, the final product that's going to be on the table. Really, really pleased with how they look and where I'm at as far as my time budget for this project is. So that gives me a lot of confidence going forward. That gives me a lot of confidence when thinking about, 100 infantry. I'm not getting overwhelmed mentally, which is important. Like, the mental fatigue or getting overwhelmed mentally is a very real part of our hobby, right? So when I think about 100 infantry, I know that I can do 15 model batches in a reasonable amount of time. So if I can maybe bump that up to 20, then that's 5 batches of infantry. I can do 5 batches of infantry, or even if I keep it at 15 and it's like 6 batches, I can do 6 batches of infantry. That's not bad at all. I've done 2 already. So really, I'm a quarter of the way there, and I've done them in what I think is a good amount of time. So the next quarter will be a good amount of time as well. and the next quarter, and then the final quarter. So breaking it up like that and having the confidence that each batch, the whole thing is going to take a while, but each batch is not going to take forever, right? What happens sometimes when you're doing army painting, you'll hit a batch. Like if I was doing, say, Ossiarch Bone Reapers or something, and I had like a really complicated scheme for the just the spear guys, or like my Nighthawks. Take my Nighthawks for example. The scheme doesn't seem that complicated, but it is time consuming. So I do like 30. I did all the chain rasps because I knew I wouldn't want to go back and do 2 batches of chain rasps. So I'm just doing one. And it's, a pain. But when I finish it, it'll be done. But it kind of halts the momentum on the project when I look at that and say, okay, I have, 5 more batches or 5 more units of ghosts, let's say, for this army, 6 more units, batches for this army, because they're all 10 to 20 models. But each batch takes a while. Then it's just kind of like, oh god, this army's gonna take forever to finish, right? Even though it's probably going to take less time than this Death Korps army would take less time than this Death Korps army is going to take. It just feels bigger in my mind because it's not. I don't have a great efficient scheme and everything. So the basing is much more convoluted, etc., etc. So, but I like the army. I'll work on it here and there. The Death Korps army will definitely be finished before that army, though. So that's saying something. Okay, I'm not going to sit here and keep rambling on and painting base rims, but you get the idea. And this guy is dry. And here we have, you see that little bit of satin on the base? I like that. And here we have the first finished Death Korps of Krieg infantrymen for this commission project. These guys look good. That's a good looking Imperial Guardsman. An entire army of Guardsmen to this standard is going to look awesome. The tanks, this thing's just going to look awesome. I need to figure out how to do army shots by the time I finish this project. But I think an entire army of Imperial Guard painted at this standard is going to look really cool. It's something I can hang my hat on, and something that hopefully my client will enjoy for years to come. So thank you for following along on this batch painting extravaganza. I enjoyed talking about batch painting. This format will take some getting used to. I can kind of streamline it maybe a little bit more. It's a little choppy, but I appreciate you sticking with me on the first kind of go round of this. And there'll be more opportunities for me to do segments like these. So thanks again. As always, if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below so that everybody can see the answer. And, we'll see you soon for another tutorial series here on the Patreon. So thanks as always for your support. Take care, be well, and the Emperor protects.